Okay, welcome to Leeds Community Homes, Cohesive Communities. This project was funded by the National Community Land Trust Network. And my name is Claude Hendrickson, and I'm the Equalities and Diversity and Inclusion Associate to Leeds Community Homes. Okay, second slide, Lucy. Leeds Community Homes wants to contribute to solving the housing crisis through community-led housing. And as you all will know, nationally, there is a massive shortage of housing. Today, we'll just be really talking about Leeds and a bit about West Yorkshire. So I'm glad to welcome all of you from West Yorkshire and nationally to this event. I'm going to give you a little journey so you can see where I'm coming from. Next slide, Lucy. Okay, my journey. In the late 80s, I started a self-build project, which was completed, it says there, in 1994. The project was called Frontline Self-Build, which was a group of young Black men from Chapeltown that took on building their own homes. And the picture below you will see is the actual houses they built. 25 years later, them houses are still standing and look the way they do. It was something like 92,000 bricks, 52,000 blocks, all laid by that group. And so yeah, 25 years on, we have a street called Frontline Close in the Ravenscars round this area of Leeds. Next slide, please, Lucy. I'm also a founder member of the Community Self-Build Agency, which was set up in 2000 to promote self-build. So that's over 20 years ago. And their main focus over the last couple of years have been in Bristol, doing self-build for ex-military men, because maybe some of you don't know that 60 to 70% of all homeless men on the street that are sleeping homeless are actually ex-soldiers that have fallen off their luck and they've ended up on the street. So in Bristol, we've done a series of blocks of flats over the last 12 years for these ex-military men. Next slide, Lucy. I then went on in 2015, along with a lot of, because one thing that is true is that Leeds has a very strong and established self-help housing network. We have projects like Gypsum, Canopy, Latch. Right now on site, we've got the Chaco, the co-housing project. We have Connect Housing, which is a housing association, and we also had the Empty Homes program. We also in Leeds have probably the best construction training college in Europe. So what we did, we set out as a group to put a 10-year strategy to Leeds City Council about how community-led housing could help and be part of solving the housing crisis that we have in Leeds. Next slide, Lucy. When we did the strategy, to give you an idea, we set targets. We was of the opinion at that time in 2015 that the community-led housing sector could deliver, we felt, by 2023, 200 houses per annum. We also felt that by 2026, that the community-led housing could be contributing with around 500 houses. Remember, this was back in 2015. This was just so that we could keep focused and keep our minds on track. We also suggested that at least 2,000 people a year would be visiting community-led housing Leeds Community Homes and the Leeds City Council's website on self-build per year by 2026. And we wanted, one of the targets I am very interested in is that we use this building community-led housing to build houses to get people trained up in construction skills, because as well as building houses, you have to maintain houses. I also believe that one of the biggest issues with a lot of the dereliction we used to have in Leeds was that the houses weren't well maintained. So it's, as well as building houses, I feel part of the exit strategy has to create people with skills that can maintain them houses. And the vision was that during this process, we could be taking a minimum of 500 long-term unemployed people off of unemployment and into construction employment, and also for them to be able to set up their own businesses. For their involvement with the project, they could be setting up their own businesses. So this is not, with me, building houses is not just about the units, it's also about the potential of upskilling our young people, and also giving people maybe who were in prison coming out looking for work with a trade, skills, and the opportunity to set up their own business. Next slide, please, Lucy. In 2019, I joined Leeds Community Homes, as you could say, the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Associate. And they sent me on, and I was privileged for them to pay for me to go on a course to become the first Black male community-led advisor in the UK. And my role is to get more Black and minority groups involved in community-led housing. So, you know, I thank Leeds Community Homes for paying for me to take that course on. And you're going to meet later on one of the people that I met on that course, Baptiste. I'll tell you a little bit more about him. So yes, that was in 2019, and this year I, like I said, I went and did my accreditation, accredited by the Chartered Housing down there in London. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. The most important goal to me, and the most important goal of this event is to help Leeds Community Homes open the way for more minority groups. And when I say minority groups, I mean Black groups, Asian groups, LGBT, and people with disability to become more involved in the community-led sector. And I don't just mean being part of projects, I actually mean these minority groups being leading on these projects. Because a lot of the time, Black and ethnic minority people have been members of said projects, but they haven't been the lead. So I want to see more Black projects being led by Black people. In the UK, self-build has been going, like I said, for decades, but the number of Black-led projects is absolutely minimal. You know, you'll get an odd example like in Bristol, you might get an odd example in Birmingham, an odd example in London, but there's not many. I reckon we make less than 5% of the community-led housing sector that are led by Black people. And Leeds Community Home, it's part of their equality, diversity and inclusion ambitions. It's their ambition to see, I believe Steve, who is our CEO, it's one of his ambitions to see more Black and ethnic minority, gay, LGBT and people with disability involved in leading on projects to refurbish and build new homes and create employment and enterprise in the city of Leeds, but also in the region. Over the next few slides, I'm going to hopefully explain, it says under that red bit there in plain English, some of the key elements involved in building your own home and what help is available in the public and private sectors. Next slide, please. Whoa, okay. Leeds needs to build more homes and lots of them. Huddersfield and Bradford also. In fact, it's estimated that Leeds needs to build between 50,000 and 70,000 homes to meet future demands by 2028, maybe 2030. Leeds Community Homes wants to be proactive in the inclusion of self-build, custom build as part of the overall housing growth strategy for the city. It is keen to include the empty homes program, shared ownership, and refurbishing projects as part of the mix. Leeds Community Homes wants to reach out and encourage and support and promote the community-led sector in the West Yorkshire region. The aim of this at Leeds Community Home is to help Leeds City and other councils chart a course of action for housing growth in Leeds over the coming years. So Leeds Community Homes is one of the hubs, and Steve will talk about this in a little while. And yes, we are based in Leeds, but we are strongly looking over the region. We're looking at, we're looking to support people in Bradford, Huddersfield, Wakefield, anybody that's under the Leeds City region umbrella. Next slide, please, Lucy. Some people will ask, what is community-led housing? Because it comes in, whoops, you've gone, all right, it comes in many forms, and there is no standard one off the shelf. It's okay, Lucy, I've got it here as well. It comes in, there's not no standard one off the shelf approaches. There's many different approaches that you can use. There's community self-build, which involves, like Frontline did, a group of people coming together to physically build their own houses and then live in them. There is community land trust, which is a fantastic way of providing affordable homes for local people in need, for rent or shared ownership by acquiring land and holding it as a community asset. So one of the things I found out in my training, one of the biggest things is about community land trust. Instead of looking at building a building, we can look at acquiring land and build on them sites, different things. It can be a mix, it can be, and I'm going to speak about some of the groups I'm speaking to later on. It can be a mix of different things on a community land trust. There's also housing cooperatives, which involve groups to provide a collective and managed democratic membership-based affordable homes for themselves and tenants and shared owners. There's co-housing, like Chaco is doing down on Roundhay Road, just in front of the petrol station. Like-minded people coming together to provide self-contained private homes for themselves, but manage the stream together with shared activities. So it can, within co-houses, you can create communal spaces. Like one of the things I've observed with some co-housing projects, that people in the houses will not have washing machines, for example. They will create a space on the site where all of the houses can go and use the washing machines. So instead of each house having a washing machine and kind of wasting water or external, they have a collective site as one example. Tenant management organization, self-help projects, and community development trust as community anchors. So when I talk about community-led housing, there's no one style that fits everybody. You have to go through a process and find out which one of the different models fit you. There's also a CIC, a community. Yes, Bill, I know you've got a laundry room. There's also community investment company. And when I speak to Legacy, when Legacy speaks a little bit later on, they'll talk to you a little bit about their community investment company idea. Next slide, please, Lucy. Right. This is kind of a diagram of how community-led housing and community land trust works. You have a group, the group gets a site, they then have a plan and look at how they raise the funds, they then build, and then they live in it. Next slide, Lucy. Oh, leave that slide there for 1 second, let people digest that slide for 1 second. This is the process. So I want you to get the idea. Now, next slide, Lucy, please. So like I said before, the group, when it comes to it, a group is set up. The group sets up a steering group which recruits new members of the community. They then agree whether it's a community land trust or a community-led housing. They decide on which of the structures they want to follow. Then they identify a site. Then they make a plan, work up a full planning application with detailed plans for homes and other facilities, get planning permission and raise the finance. They then build, and this could be using, they could build this themselves, or they could use a local contractor, or they could have a local partner such as a housing association like Chaco is doing. Again, I mentioned Chaco because they're on site right now. And they're working, for example, with a local housing association called Unity Housing Association. And once you've done all of that, you live in it and you manage it. And sometimes, like Chaco is going to be as a landlord. And as well as decide how to use the surplus for benefit of your community. So that is the kind of process all groups will have to go through. The group, the site, plan, build, live. They're the 5 steps that whether you want to be a community land trust or whether you want to be a community-led housing project, they're the 5 steps. And this is a generic platform. All groups have to go through this process. Next slide, Lucy. Lucy, where have you gone? Lucy. Thank you, Lucy. Okay. Leeds estimates it will have to build between 50 and 70,000 houses between now and 2028. This equates to give you an idea, 4,000 dwellings per year, including around 1,158 that have to be affordable housing. There is currently a waiting list of around 21,000 people in Leeds on the waiting list to get housing. So it is a very much supply and demand, and there is definitely a demand with 21,000 people on the waiting list. Most of Leeds' new housing will be built by property developments who also contracted to do social housing for both the council and local housing association. It is clear that the community-led sectors can only contribute a small percentage of these units, but it will help to go towards reducing the numbers they have to do. We would like to see some take-up of that demand by increasing the allocation to the community-led sector, by building the housing capacity of organizations like Leeds Community Homes in Leeds. Next slide. And I'm running, where's my time? Whoa, I've got 3 minutes. Right. So far this year, just to give you an idea of some of the groups I've been advising and working with since starting, I have 2 African Caribbean groups, one that is, well, it's one big group, but half of them are interested in refurbishment, bringing houses back into use, the Empty Homes program as their option. Half of them are interested in self-build, but they're not sure whether they want to be a CLT, a co-op, or a CIC. The Leeds West Indian Centre Charitable Trust is looking at becoming a CLT because they have a decent piece of land and they have some ideas. I'm speaking with and working with the Chapeltown Youth Development Centre, and we're discussing the possibilities of them becoming a CLT or a CIC. They have some land that they're looking at developing some sports and training complex. And we're also looking at some housing hopefully to be on that site. Tonight, you're going to hear a little bit from Legacy, the Legacy Housing Group. We've got Marcia and Bev here. They will be, they are still not sure what structure, but they're very much looking at the CIC, and we're still talking about which will be the right structure for them, whether co-housing, self-build. I've also got an Asian group that I am speaking with that are very interested. I'm meeting with their community leaders about a possible CLT. I'm also meeting with RETAS, which is the Refugees Education Training Advice Center. They are in early discussions. Fidel is here and some of the members. We're in early discussions and they are very interested in creating a co-op to refurbish empty homes. I'm also in meetings with the Leeds Homeless Charter, Unity in Poverty Action, and we're looking at discussions beyond COVID and how we can look at the homelessness in the city and how we can look at some housing for them. That's beyond COVID. We're also in discussions with Leeds Migration Partnership, which is with Lasson and Abigail Housing Association, discussion again around housing the homeless beyond COVID. I'm also supporting an LGBT group called Freedom, who have set up, and we're continuing to meet. Me and my other brother and sister advisors are supporting them. I'm aware of my time's running out. One thing I would say to those certain people, I can see lots of things coming up in the chat, but I'll hit that later. Due to COVID, we haven't been able to move things on as quick as I would have liked this year, because especially with African, Caribbean, and some of the other BAME groups, they prefer a more hands-on approach, and they're not too happy with this Zoom business. So hopefully when we get into 2021, we can get some groups together and we can knock some ideas together. Next slide, I'm coming to the end. I'm already over. Okay, I want to talk about community-led and the multiple outcomes that it has. Yes, it delivers housing solutions, affordable and accessible housing. It's community-based, it's a social enterprise. It has the potential to develop employment and training, construction skills, that is tackling the skills gap, youth employment, qualifications, active participation, building confidence, helping with developing safer communities, rewarding volunteers, getting some of them empty homes refurbished and up and running, benefits to the owners, community cohesion. I've got that, Bill. And for me, one of the exit strategies from doing projects like this, I'm hoping that we could bring out of mothballs some of them retired builders to help and be site foremen, site supervisors, becoming local contractors as a business. For example, in Leeds 7, we have an annual maintenance contract of council accommodations of in excess of £5 million. So that could be creating some employment for local people. Okay, Lucy, next slide. Thank you for that. We'll take questions at the end, and do remember, put your questions in the chat. Part of my role with Leeds Community Homes has been 3-tier. One, to ensure they have representation on their board. 2, to have Black and ethnic minority representation with their staff. And 3 is to get more Black ethnic minorities and LGBT people and people with disability to join the movement. And you can do this by registering on Leeds Community Homes website. If you go to their website and you register your name, then you become a member. What I will tell you is usually it's £1 a year for membership, but with COVID, we're not collecting. So at this moment, you can get in and join for free. So take up that opportunity. And I want to take this time now to thank you for listening to me, wow, thank you very much. You can pull my slides down now, Lucy. What I'm going to do now is introduce you. Well done, Lucy. Thank you for that. What I'm going to do now is introduce you to Steve Hoey, who is the CEO of Leeds Community Homes. Like I said before, I have to pay him his respect because he's the reason that I'm here. So, and Steve is going to give you a bit of an overview of what Leeds Community Homes offer in principle for groups and how they can be supportive of you if you want to take a community-led project forward. Steve, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Claude. That was brilliant. I'm just going to talk for probably 4 or 5 minutes max, just to tell you about Leeds Community Homes and the kind of support we offer. There's loads of other great speakers to come after me, so I'm not going to take much time. So my name's Steve and I work at Leeds Community Homes. I was involved in setting it up 5 years ago. Before that, I used to work at Canopy Housing in Leeds, working in some of the inner city areas, doing up empty homes with local volunteers. So my whole career has been in housing, and I've been working with Claude probably for the last 10 years or so on different projects. So it's been really great to be able to work with him on this particular project. And it's just fantastic to see so many people on this call and such a diverse set of people as well. I mean, Claude has often said to me that he often goes to meetings or conferences or gets on a Zoom and is the only black face in the whole thing. And this is kind of like role reversal, I think, and that feels brilliant. I think we're achieving something because lots of people are interested in community-led housing, but we have found that it hasn't been a very diverse sector over the years. You know, there are examples of black-led and minority-led projects, but they're fairly few and far between, and we just want to try and enable a much better representation of communities through this kind of work, because as Claude was saying, it's got so many benefits to it that we want everyone to be able to benefit from those things. So I was saying Leeds Community Homes was set up 5 years ago. We've got 3 main strands to our work. One is we want to build homes ourselves that are affordable, sustainable, and community-led. And another thing we want to do is we want to help other people to build community-led homes. And sometimes those 2 things come together where we can partner with groups, and we're actually becoming a registered provider. So we will be able to partner with groups in the future to help make schemes happen. The 3rd strand of our work is around building the movement, the community-led movement nationally. And we're really trying to plug ourselves in. We know lots of people all around the country, and we stay up to date with what's going on. We lobby government, we write to our MPs. We've had some good responses actually from MPs just in the last few days, 2 or 3 getting back to us, including Hilary Benn, asking how things are going and can he help lobby government for us. So our geography, just quickly, you know, we did start off in Leeds, and we talked about wanting to work in the Leeds area, and then it was Leeds City region, and now with devolution we're happy to work all across West Yorkshire. We also work in South Yorkshire and in some of the counties in North Yorkshire, and we work in York and other places. We actually give advice to groups all around the country, Bristol, Brighton, Northumberland, Manchester. So we're happy to work anywhere with anyone really, as long as we can squeeze in the hours in the day. So I'm going to try and share my screen now, because I want to encourage you to have a look at our website if you haven't done that already. And there we go. Can you see that? That's the home screen of our website. And so if you have a look around, by all means, if you go up to the Claude was mentioning about joining as a member, you can go here to this join us button, and in there you can get on our mailing list and you can join up. You can become a member here and join our mailing list. You can do both or just one. We'd love you all to become members. It doesn't cost anything, and you'll be supporting this movement and joining. And and if you join the mailing list, you'll hear regular news from us about what's going on in the sector and around the region. So back to the home page, and then here on this tab, Get Support. This is where we talk about what support we can give. We're really keen to hear from anyone on this call and anyone you know who's interested in doing a housing project. We can talk to you and start to walk you through some of the steps. And we scroll down. The first thing we ask people to do after we've had a chat is to fill in this health check support questionnaire. That's about 10 questions, and it gives us an idea of where you're at, how big your group is, what you're thinking of doing, that kind of thing. And then we go down and we hit this thing called the Get Clear and Ready checklist. When we hit that, there's a resource there that you can see, which it's a 3-page document, and it just gives you a really quick run through of the process that Claude was talking about earlier. So just to let you know the things we would talk through with you and try and support you with, we'd try and help you get an agreed vision, which is really clear, like an outline of what you want to do, help you boil it down to like a 100-word statement. The next thing would be around governance arrangements, how you're going to set up, what legal structure you might have, what ownership. And the next thing might be a general statement of what arrangements you want for the project. And then the next thing would be around group development. So how are you going to make decisions? What roles are you going to have? Who's going to have what responsibilities? We talk about equalities and diversity, engagement with the wider community, and that kind of thing, policies and things like that. So we start to help groups to think about these sorts of things. So do have a look at our website and sign up if you want to. Okay, how do I not share? Let's see. Okay, I can't work out how to unshare, so I'll just keep talking and then Lucy can sort it out. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, so just either put your questions in the chat and we'll try and answer them all in the Q&A, question and answers, yeah, just get in touch after this session through the website, and we'd love to be in touch with you. Thanks very much. Back to you, Claude. Who's next?
You're on mute, Claude. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Myself again, that was me being polite. I hope everybody has got rather than the boxes, they click on the left hand side, you've got a number of little boxes or 3 dots under a box, so you've got the speaker slide. One of the things, the next speaker I'm going to bring on is Henry Baptiste, but I'm going to say a little bit before that, in that sometimes when they talk about Black and ethnic minority people, they often say that we're hard to reach. And what I found is it's not that we're hard to reach, we've been easy to ignore. And people will have us in projects as tokenism as opposed to leading on the projects. And what I'm talking about is developing a platform where Black people can be leading the projects, not be just part of the project, but leading the projects. And to that, Steve mentioned, yes, I go to so many meetings where, and over this last 8 months, Zoom meetings where I'm the only Black face in the meeting. But that's nothing that is unusual for me. For over the last 20 years, whether I've been working in youth work, whether I've been working as part of the Labour Party, or whether I've been working in the community. It's always been the same, whether it's health I'm going on, so I don't worry about that. But when I was on the training, I was fortunate to end up in Newcastle, and I was really quite a bit worried at first about going to Newcastle. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm going to be the only black face up here. And when I walked into the room, there was another brother there, and that brother was Henry Baptiste. And we kind of just left, we just kind of whoosh, we just made it work. We just levitated to each other, and we talk a lot. We spent a lot of time talking about how we could drive the agenda for more inclusion, more black-led projects. He was doing some fantastic work, or he had some fantastic plans for Nottingham, and me and him had plans to push this agenda, and we're doing a lot of work nationally around doing some research into the whole network of community-led housing. So what I want to do here now is introduce Henry Baptiste, who is from Pathway Housing Solutions, Nottingham, to give you some of the work he's doing in Nottingham and some of the plans he has for Nottingham. Henry Baptiste.
Thanks,
Can
Claude.
you put up his slides, please, Lucy?
Hello, everybody. Yeah, Henry Baptiste from Pathway Housing Solutions. I mean, Claude's given a good introduction, really, by saying we only met, and I think it's just about a year ago now, when we were both doing this training, the community-led housing advisor training. And my experience, I haven't been around as long as Claude, but my experience was similar in that I thought I was the only black guy in this sector. Which is surprising, because the sector, surprisingly, is quite a big sector. It includes a number of umbrella organizations. It includes cooperative housing, co-housing, community land trust. It includes financial institutions as part of it, funding institutions as part of it. It's a big sector. So for there only to be two obvious black people in that sector shows that there's a clear underrepresentation, both in terms of BME-led organizations and also in terms of BME people in key positions within the sector. So for me, as I said, it was refreshing to come across a guy who is not only just black, but also has done it as well. And so me and Claude clearly clicked right at the outset. And we've got plans to do stuff together. And one of the things he mentioned was where we've been given some funding to undertake a scoping study into the community-led housing sector itself, but looking it through a black prism. And the idea really is to look at where there may be barriers, structural barriers, or systemic discrimination or challenges as part of that system that aren't encouraging enough BME-led organizations or not enough BME beneficiaries, i.e. more black people benefiting from the funding that goes into this sector to have homes, affordable homes. And it is a sector where there's been a massive amount of money thrown around it. But for me and for Claude, it's about how we can get some balance across this process. So can you move on to our next slide, please? So Pathway Housing Solutions, essentially we're an organization with a focus on, as it says here, training, housing, volunteering, and supporting communities. Our next slide. In terms of who we are then. So our slogan is building futures, yeah? So we're not just focused around bricks and mortar, we're focused around communities. We're a not-for-profit, set up to provide housing for those in need and to work with partners to tackle the challenges faced by our communities. And our social enterprise model, which is the next picture, the next slide, kind of explains the approach that we're seeking to take with this. So on the left side, you'll see the blue boxes and a picture of a pretty terrace row of new builds. And so our approach very much is about providing homes to people struggling to rent or buy. And we're not exclusively about providing provision for BME groups, but we know that there are people in society who are marginalized from getting on the housing ladder. So our focus is about building new homes on small infill sites, brownfield sites. We also want to be, sorry, as people are putting messages in the box, it comes across my screen. We're also looking to renovate buildings to create new homes, long-term empty homes, bringing them back into life. And another role for Pathway Housing Solutions is to enable and support groups, particularly BME groups, to develop their own homes. You know, I'm a guy who's been a community activist for a while in Nottingham, and I've seen over the years lots of changes. I've seen a lot of community buildings that were run by BME voluntary groups disappear, be taken over or sold to private developers by councils. And over time, what we see now is less and less venues for BME people around, because they've been asset stripped. So part of our role is about motivating, encouraging, empowering our own people to take ownership of assets that can be retained for community benefit. And on the right-hand side, in the green boxes, that's very much our focus around community. We recognise, as I said, that community isn't just about, or housing just isn't just about bricks and mortar, it's about community as well. So we recognise that part of our remit, part of our responsibility is also to look at offering employability programs, training, wrapping that around our construction sites, and also about delivering social and community impact projects. And we've done parenting programs, ESOL, classes specifically for women. We've ran holiday hunger programs before it got so popular in the media. So for us, being involved in community is a big part of what Pathway Housing Solutions is about. So if you could move on to our next slide, please. So why are we doing this? I mean, the story is out there. Socially and economically, people are struggling, and generally through every crisis, Black and minority communities are disproportionately affected, generally because we're at the sharp end of structural and systemic inequalities. But have a look at the information there. Thousands of people are struggling to get on the housing line. People are struggling because of affordability problems. They can't afford to rent, or they're struggling to rent, and they can't afford to buy. Overcrowding, evictions from private landlords is on the increase, or maybe not at the moment because of the measures the government have put in place, but guaranteed as soon as those measures are withdrawn, lots of people are going to be made homeless through evictions. Councils definitely are struggling to find suitable housing for families, and that means less choice for people and increasing numbers of people on the waiting list. Families trapped in temporary accommodation for longer periods, numbers of people that are homeless are rising, and housing inequalities. And it can be argued that the choice-based letting process exacerbates this, but housing inequalities are disproportionately impacting on BME people and young people. Long-term empty properties, and that's something that is our focus. There's waves of long-term empty properties out there, and at the same time, there's a shortage of affordable homes being built. Councils losing their housing stock for right to buy, or rationalising their stock, and councils disposing of their surplus land and property to the market sector. We all know about mental health and health inequalities, and COVID-19 has kind of brought that to stark light, really, that as a community, where, as I said earlier on, we're impacted more so through every crisis, and a health crisis, this COVID-19 crisis has kind of shone a light on that even more so. I think another key thing to mention is that with poverty increasing amongst BME groups, there's clearly poorer outcomes occurring in our communities. And part of what Pathway Housing wants to do is to address these challenges. So moving on to our next slide, please. This slide again essentially just emphasizes some key points that I've already covered. Long-term empty properties, number of properties that are actually needed and the actual numbers that are actually built. Government's focus, central government's focused on new homes, and not necessarily addressing the issue around more social housing. But another key point to mention here is that for 4 decades of struggle by BME communities, despite the fact that it's been bolstered by legislation, statutory and regulatory codes from the 1960s onwards, have really failed to confront adequately and systemically racial disadvantage and discrimination in housing. And that's not my terms, that came from the BME National Alliance. And the BME National Alliance are the umbrella body for BME housing associations. They're a national body for the UK. Thank you. Can you move on to the next slide, Claude? So what are we doing? We're small fry. We have 2 family homes that we're leasing from agents. We're developing a GoFundMe and empty homes campaign. And the idea about that is really it's a multi-campaign, but also a promotional campaign to promote pathway housing solutions and options for routes to affordable housing for people, where we continue to deliver family and community learning programs, but clearly that's been impacted by COVID-19. And we're also about supporting career opportunities. We are in discussions with the 2 universities in Nottingham at the moment, and the reason for that is within the built environment sector. So we're talking about professional sector, the architects, the quantity surveyors, the building surveyors. There's an underrepresentation of BME young people going into those professions. And we've been having dialogue with the 2 universities in Nottingham. And they've made it really clear that their reach and engagement with BME young people is poor. The numbers going into university to cover to undertake those levels of study is poor. Their succession route from 1 year to the next is poor. Their attainment is poor, and their positive destinations is poor. And this has come from the 2 universities, so they recognise clearly that there aren't enough BME young people going into the built environment sector and getting those jobs. But they also recognise the university, they're not that good at progressing or engaging with BME young people into those kind of careers. And so one of the things that we're looking at with those universities is how we can support them, support them in terms of bringing more Black young people into the built environment sector. And another area that we're looking at is clearly on an ongoing basis is recruiting more people as part of our movement. Next slide, please, Lucy. We're going to be running next year a range of events that we've called Hope for Housing, and these are essentially community conversation events. And this is something that we're also planning to do in partnership with Leeds Community Housing. And the idea behind it, and the session today is a kind of reflection of what we're looking at doing, is to raise awareness through these community conversations about the different and various routes for affordable housing. Many people, and me included, before I got into this sector, the only options I was aware of was renting from a landlord, getting on the council waiting list, or buying my own place. But the reality is that there are other routes that are available to accessing affordable housing for people, but it's not generally advertised or not generally known within our own people. And part of what we want to do is make people aware of this as an alternative route, as an alternative option. Key to that is engaging with our communities, but we also want to start stimulating discussion about the housing crisis and about homelessness and about mental health. These are key things that are impacting on our community. And as I've said, we're also about raising funds for the work that we want to do. Next slide, please. Community research, evidence. I have a background, quite an eclectic background, and I've worked in homelessness. I've ran hostels, I ran probation hostels. I've set up semi-independent units for care leavers. I've also worked in economic regeneration as well. So I've got quite a varied background, as well as all the kind of community activist work I've been involved in. And for me, evidence is crucial. The government uses evidence and data to inform its policy. Local governments use evidence and data to inform their policy, but they also use that to inform their commissioning decisions, where they spend their money. One of the pieces of work that we're looking at is to undertake some research into homelessness in the BME community. We're calling that hidden voices, simply because it is hidden voices. We all know through COVID-19, there's been a lot of attention on rough sleepers. And we also know that central government has given masses amount of money to local government and other institutions to under this banner of everyone in. The reality is, we also know that the BME population is underrepresented in that rough sleeper population, and consequently, those resources aren't being targeted at our community. And that's not to suggest that homelessness doesn't impact on our community, because clearly it does, but it's hidden, it's not recorded, and consequently, resources aren't targeted on it. And so that piece of research that we're doing really is to shine a light on the issue of homelessness in the BME community. And we've had discussions with Nottingham City Council, and they don't gather data in terms of ethnicity. We've spoken to organisations that have been funded through national routes to support homelessness from rough sleeping, and they don't gather data on homelessness from an ethnic perspective. So clearly, organisations that are set up to provide a service to our community aren't actually gathering data to inform the service that they deliver. Another piece of work that myself and Claude are involved in is looking at the role of the community-led housing sector in improving housing conditions for BME communities, which we're still looking for additional funding for. So if anybody out there knows of anybody that can make a contribution to this piece of research, it's a valuable piece of research that we're looking at doing, just get in touch. And a third piece of research that we're looking at is something called No Place Like Home, and that looks at the wider issues in terms of the housing crisis and housing inequalities. Can we have the next slide still? So in terms of our approach, Pathway Housing Solutions, going back to the first diagram that I showed you, is essentially about new builds and empty properties. So our approach, the theme of the approach that we've taken to long-term empty properties, we call homemade. And the idea behind that is that it's built by the people who will live in them. And as it says there, we intend to renovate long-term empty properties, provide on-site work experience that people can get skills in construction, also gain qualifications, and essentially to create homes for people who are struggling to find somewhere safe and stable. If you look at the bullet points at the bottom, the blue ones, there are thousands of long-term empty properties that are sitting idle at a time when we're going through a housing crisis. Unemployment is rising, but the construction sector is struggling to fill jobs with qualified people. We feel that homemade provides a solution. Yeah, it's not a panacea, but it provides a solution to the issue of homelessness, long-term empty properties, people struggling to get on a housing ladder. The next slide, please, Lucy. So, laying the foundations. That's our approach to building new homes, and that is for us about small infill sites, building energy efficient, new affordable homes. And what I mean by that is fuel poverty is a big issue. It's a massive issue. And if we can build homes that are energy efficient, that can keep people's money in their pockets rather than paying out on expensive fuel bills, then that's part of our approach. We also want to explore something called modern methods of construction. That's essentially what we deem to be a cheaper way of building. If you can build something off-site and bring it onto site, it reduces your costs. For us, there are clearly environmental improvements. We can use local supply chains, which means that local businesses would benefit, local people benefit in terms of jobs, and we can focus these homes on our communities of interest. The blue bullet points again, profit-driven private developers are buying land in urban areas across the city, and they're building gated communities for sale or to rent at market prices. Essentially what that means is that local families and communities are either displaced or outpriced by the impact of rising rent and rising house prices. I grew up in an area called Lenton in Nottingham, When I grew up in the 60s, and at that time, there was a lot of private rented properties, but there were also a lot of black people that actually owned homes in that area. I wasn't lucky enough to come from a family that could afford its own housing, so we lived in council housing. But this area was populated by a really vibrant and diverse community. We had a leisure centre, we had a primary school, a nursery, and a secondary school. We had shops virtually on every corner. Most people around this on this Zoom call can remember and echo those days. The reality is that area is no longer the same. You have student bars where there were local shops. You have houses in multiple occupation where there was once families living. And for me, the statement that comes from that is that local people can no longer afford to live in that area. The statement that comes from that is that councils are supportive of massive student developments by private developers, but the impact of that is there is no longer a school in that area. There are no longer primary schools in that area. There are less BME people living in that area, and the cost of living in that area or even buying properties in that area have gone through the roof. So moving on to our next slide then, please, Lucy. Clearly there are challenges to the approach that we're taking. I'm not disputing that, but what we do know is that local authorities are going through a difficult time, but they do own land and property. We also know that there are opportunities for land and property in the private sector. We know that the council owns community building, and for us, if we can work with a council that's receptive, that has a mindset where it wants to work with communities and support communities, if it has a mindset where it recognises that BME groups are underrepresented and disproportionately impacted by some of the policies that it introduces, and if it also recognises that there are actually policies in law, such as the Local Government Act 1972, that provide drivers for the local authorities to support BME people to take over land or buildings, community ownership of asset stock. So all that's, or measures are in place there. The reality and the barrier is not necessarily whether or not there is the ability to do it, but it's about whether or not local authorities have the will to do it, to support groups to make things happen. Another key part of our role is clearly has to be about connecting and building relationships with councils, but not just councils, housing associations. And Claude kind of alluded to this, but housing associations have a key role here in terms of supporting groups. They have access to public funding, yeah. They have access to money to support you. They bring development expertise in terms of construction. They bring housing management expertise in terms of managing properties. And they also bring tenancy support expertise as well. So as a community organisation, where we see the benefits of having a relationship with the local authority, we clearly see the benefits of having a relationship with housing associations as well. But we also know that there are funding bodies out there that we have to develop relationships with as well. And within the sector in which we work, we operate social lenders, which aren't your typical high street banks, but there are social lenders, charity bank, ecology, Unity Trust, to name a few. And so for us, what is crucial is these working collaboratively with these key stakeholders, part of our ambitions. We've also talked about, mentioned training bodies there, and Claude also mentioned about the importance of saying it's important to build relationships with people so that we can support them in gaining skills in construction. For me, I think developers, contractors, having relationships with them is just as important. The reason I say that is because these are people who can offer added value in building homes. Developers have a responsibility where they're building dwellings for private sale to make a contribution or an allocation for affordable housing. Councils probably don't want to tell us too much about that, but that means that you can go and speak directly to a developer and say, here, what? You've got to build some houses here, and you've got a responsibility, part of your planning obligations, to provide some affordable housing. Why don't you give it to us? Okay, so there are routes and mechanisms, but I'm not naive to believe that it's an easy route that we're going down. Yeah, and for me, there are kind of key gaps and key skills gaps that we need to fill in order for us to achieve our ambitions. And one of them is that we want to build a movement here in Nottingham. Yeah, we want to raise understanding and awareness. We want to let people know, give knowledge to people to know that they can actually take responsibility for themselves. Why wait on a local council? Why wait on a housing association? These are things that we can do for ourselves. But professional technical skills and experience are lacking in our community, and we need to be able to find that and bring that in. Another thing is that access to finance is a struggle, and that's because, to some degree, because of the way the system is set up. But I also recognise access to contract. Small groups rather than established groups. The difficulties faced by smaller independent BME organisations in getting funding and contracts and being marginalised from mainstream delivery and decision making is a real issue. And what I'm talking about there is a procurement process. So my final slide.
Henry.
I'm just about to come to an end. My final one. Yeah. So basically, to sum us up, we're a social value creating community housing company that works in the most disadvantaged neighborhoods while promoting cohesion and offering communities opportunities and pathways to improve their life chances and housing ambitions. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks, Claude.
Claude, you're muted again.
Oh, come on. What's wrong with my machine? This machine is very in-depth. Thank you for that, Henry. And you can see why when I met him, we hooked up and we spend quite a lot of time on the phone. We spend a lot of time talking. You know, like he said, I only met him a year ago, but, you know, we speak a lot, and he's got very in-depth, I suppose, and that's Nottingham. You probably hear the same thing about London, Manchester, Birmingham, you know, other areas of the country. So, you know, the issues are more or less the same. Okay, we're running over, and I had to let Henry do his piece. I want now to hand you over to two ladies. Like I said, I've met Henry, strong, knows what he's talking, and we're going to be, you know, we've got some great plans. I've got two ladies that I want to introduce you to now. Beverly Brown, who has and she'll tell you a little bit about herself, a wicked entrepreneur, more than 30 years in the housing sector at senior levels. And she'll tell you a little bit about herself. And Marcia. Marcia is a businesswoman. She got a lot of fingers in lots of pies. She is real conscious, and both of them are really conscious. But, you know, it's like I said, to find a brother in the sector like Henry, but also to find two sisters who are very interested in community development, personal development, empowerment. So I'd like to, they've set up or are in the process of setting up Legacy, maybe CLC. We're still talking about structures, but the two ladies I also have a lot of time with. We spend a lot of time. If I'm not speaking to one, I'm speaking to the other, or we're speaking together. So can I, and I'm quite aware, just to say that I'm quite aware we've gone a bit over time. I hope you can hang in there with us for a little longer and got any questions. So I'll hand you over to Bev and Marcia, Legacy. Welcome.
Thank you, Claude. Are you off mute, Marcia?
I am.
Okay, all right. Good evening, everybody. Claude, thank you for that introduction, and it's great to be here on this session today, and it is so empowering. You know, your speech, Claude and Henry, you know, what you've just covered in terms of your overview has given, you know, a really good, robust, thorough understanding of what's happening in the sector for disadvantaged communities. So Marcia and I came together in the summer. We are two businesswomen and we're based in Leeds. And for a number of months, we've been talking about trying to see how we can actually break through and look at providing an element of social housing for our community. We do know that it does already exist in some form in terms of what's provided by the local authority and the registered social housing providers, but the needs are more than the supply that's out there in the sector. And as Henry said, there is actually hidden voices, and it's been brought out more so with this whole COVID pandemic over the past few months. So we are very pleased to be supported by Leeds and Claude in terms of trying to progress through our organisation. And we are currently just at the very early stages of setting up. So Claude mentioned some of the various different segments in terms of setting up a community-led housing organisation. We are at the very early stages and we are forming the group. So I'm going to pass you on to Marcia for her to go through some of the missions, aims and objectives of what we're looking to achieve.
Thank you, Dave. Greetings, everybody, and thank you for bearing with us. I know we're running a little bit over, but as Bev said, we are at the formation stage, really. So I can't keep you very long because there isn't a string of achievements to tell you about, but one day there will be. So as Bev mentioned, we got together, we've known each other, well, a family really, and we've known each other for years. But I think there comes a time in your life when you feel that we have to stop talking about the issues that our community faces or our people face, and take a stand or put your efforts or your commitments down into something concrete, really. And I think that's what happened over the summer. It was obviously bolstered, but we've always had concerns about the lack of housing opportunities for people of our community, of our groups, and but we just felt that perhaps even with COVID, perhaps we had a little more time and a little more space to think. But equally, what happened with George Floyd as well, became quite a concrete motivator really for us to do something. So as Claude and Bev have said, we are still in the formation stage really. We're likely to form a KIC of all the different types of formations that we could have. It's likely to be a KIC because we like the idea that you can still make profits, but instead into growing the into growing the housing whatever formation it becomes. We like the idea that we can continue to grow that, and it's an ongoing process really, that we're constantly able to reinvest our profits and also apply for funding and things like that. So we're at this stage now where we've got together and discussed what our vision, our mission, our objectives and our values are going to be. So I'll just briefly talk you through those. So our overall mission is going to be to create good quality, affordable housing primarily for the African and Caribbean community members in Leeds. Now I know that could well sound a little bit divisive to some people, but Claude has talked about in great detail. Steve has touched on it, and Henry's very much reiterated the out and out need for more housing provision for our people. And if I must say, from my point of view, exclusively for our community, because the level of disadvantage and the level of racial disadvantage and discrimination in housing is overwhelming. We can't really ignore it, and we feel that if we really do want to tackle this thing, then unfortunately we do have to drill down, and we do have to focus on groups who are more severely disadvantaged than others. It would be great to live in a really inclusive society where everybody was treated fairly, but that's not the UK. We are not in that utopia yet, and until we are there, we need to be in a position where we can redress that balance, really. So as a mission, our mission is likely to be, like I mentioned, our formation is likely to be a community interest company. We want to create more affordable, sustainable housing, primarily for the African and Caribbean community, by building new homes and refurbishing empty properties, because we're very much mindful of our footprint as people. I think that's very important in the way that we live our lives. But Henry touched on it, and probably Claude and Steve have mentioned it. We have a shocking amount of empty homes in this country, while at the same time we have a growing demand, and we have a growing number of homeless people who are homeless. We also have all the hidden homeless as well. So there's obviously a lot of work that people have been talking about this for decades, and we really want to make some inroads into that, really. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate that, you know, there are reasons why some homes are empty, and the reasons why some homes are empty is because they're in areas where people don't want to live. And, you know, that speaks to like a bigger issue, really, around, you know, building up communities and things like that. So as I said, building new homes, refurbishing empty homes. We aim to be involved in creating, we've set a figure of, say, 500 affordable, sustainable homes in Leeds by 2030. I think, you know, we have to set goals and have ambitions. So our objectives are twofold, really. Our primary objectives are to act as a community interest company, primarily for the African and Caribbean community members in Leeds, buying land and buildings to create affordable, sustainable homes. We also want to, another primary aim is to develop affordable housing for African members to live in and work, who live and work in Leeds, and to make our community stronger and more sustainable. Our secondary objectives are likely to be support training skills and employment opportunities, primarily for the African and Caribbean community members, to enable individuals to gain sustainable and long-term employment, and to also have a sense of independence and a sense of being able to contribute to society more, and to be the captains of their own ships, for want of a better phrase, to have a bit more control over their own destiny. So, you know, our values are likely to be, we want to be a Black community-led organisation. And, you know, why we say that just speaks to what Claude and Steve and Henry have talked about, how there's underrepresentation there. And, you know, we have to ask the question, is the racial disadvantage and discrimination that's rife in housing, is it because there is underrepresentation by people of our groups? And the only way we will know that is if there is more representation there, and then, you know, we can make a better assessment. So as I said, a Black community-led organisation will primarily support the African and Caribbean community members to secure affordable, sustainable housing. We want to be people-focused, so we acknowledge and our aim is to address the challenges that are facing African and Caribbean community in assessing and securing affordable, sustainable housing. And we also want to be needs focused as well. We want to continue to tackle the socio-economic disparities facing the African and Caribbean community members that we work with a view to improving their economic and well-being outcomes. What that boils down to me is basically providing more access to rented accommodation for people, more, and if they then want to get a foot on the housing ladder, again, we're poorly represented. We're poorly represented in that way, and everybody knows from studying all the economic data out there that being able to afford housing can impact your social mobility. It can impact your ability to be able to have money to set aside for your children, your next generation, to go to university, for you to perhaps set up a business or that kind of thing. And something that's really brought it into sharp focus is the recent case. I don't know if you've, hopefully many of you have heard of it, of the black woman that had to take a London housing association to court because she found out that over, I think it was over a 5-year period, she was paying double the amount of rent for the same property that her white counterpart was paying. And that really speaks to how that can have wide-reaching implications. She as a result of it, she suffered all kinds of difficulties faced by meeting her housing costs. She was on the verge of eviction at some point, while her white counterpart was being supported in any difficulties she had with paying her rent and things. And that kind of racial disadvantage and discrimination is taking money out of the black community, or it is out of the black community, because there's less funds for them to be able to spend and to be able to invest in their futures and their children's futures. So sometimes people think it's just racial discrimination in housing, but actually it impacts all different aspects of people's lives and their life chances, their social mobility, their opportunity. Really do need to drill down on it and do what we can to try and minimize the impact. It's probably too much to ask for to think that we can eradicate racial disadvantage and discrimination, but we can no longer run away from it and pretend that it isn't there. So what I'll do is I'll post a link to the article, because I think somebody's popped up saying they've not heard about it. It brings it into really sharp focus, and that is one person. I think we're all intelligent enough to appreciate that she will not be the only person. Not only will she not be the only person, there will be others who have faced that, and all those wide-reaching implications for other people in our community, really. So like I said, we're still at the idea stage, really, but we're very, very passionate, focused and determined to make an impact, really. And that's one of the reasons why we've got legacy in our name, because we need to create a legacy for our future generations. Henry touched on something about the difficulties that his family faced with having access to being able to buy their own property. That was in the 60s. We are 50 years later, 5 decades forward, and we're still facing the same problems. I'm sorry, but that can't stand anymore, essentially. So as Henry talked about and Steve talked about, what we want to do is have those community conversations. We want to be able to educate our community into all the alternative routes that there are available. Just like Henry said, people thought that the only options was to rent privately or rent socially, largely, and that was largely it, but that there are other opportunities. And we want to make sure that our people are aware of them and are encouraged to take those up, because, you know, in the discussions I've heard tonight, some people have talked about how we're not accessing services and why are we not being engaged and those kinds of things. And we can't just change things without tackling the root cause of why we're not engaging and why we don't feel that these, you know, owning a house is for us, or you know, we don't feel that we have access to those opportunities. You know, we want to be, you know, whether it's a think tank or something like that, but just have some kind of community involvement and community discussions, really, so that people can feel that they are a part of something and can you know, contribute to the betterment of them and the people around them's future, not just their future, their existence and their current circumstances and their future circumstances. Really, like I said, it's about creating a legacy for our existing community members and their next generation.
Okay, so I just want to add that, you know, we've mentioned that we're at the forming stage, and the next steps for us is engaging with the wider community in Leeds. So we will be setting up a series of meetings so that people can engage with us, and we can give you an overview of what they're looking to achieve in Leeds. We want to bring people on board. We want to hear from you. We're looking for members as well to join the CIC. So Marcia and I are the founders, but we really need to bring the community on board with this. So we will be putting out some information, mainly on social media and through Leeds community homes, to get people to start engaging with us so that we get this right. We want to make sure we get it right, and we form an organisation that you know, people from our grassroots are going to reap the benefits from.
Okay, thank you for that, ladies, very much. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Bev. Sue, Sarah